I would now like to introduce our next speaker. Melissa Doman, MA, is an organizational psychologist, former clinical mental health therapist, and a mental health at work specialist. I'm delighted to introduce Melissa, who I will be having a conversation with today. Hi, Melissa. It's great to have you here with us.
Hello, good morning from the East Coast of the US.
Good morning from Dublin. So, I have noticed that undergraduate students can be very self critical of their work and its potential value. When entrants submit work and they end up being awarded, they often don't attribute the award themselves to their own hard work. Are these behaviors typical of imposter syndrome? Can you tell us more about what imposter syndrome is, why it comes about, and also why it is so early to catch it early in our careers?
First of all, thank you so much for having me. And it is so wonderful to speak to this audience because I used to do counseling within a university environment. And I so wish that these sorts of feelings were explained better to that population, not only when I was working with them, but also when I was in university myself. And so, based on what you described, that absolutely sounds like imposter syndrome. And so many people experience it, no matter who you are, where you're from, male or female. Typically, first, it came about in the late 1970s, but has since really exploded in terms of how many people are experiencing it. So there's a lot of different definitions that are floating around out there, but putting it most succinctly, it's basically just this collection of feelings of inadequacy, or and putting it more fancily, intellectual fraudulence, but it's very much self-perceived. And so oftentimes when people will achieve things, they often attribute it to external factors or luck as opposed to their own hard work or intelligence or whatever it is. So it's just become so incredibly common. And the reason that it's really quite important to catch it earlier in your career is you can save yourself a lot of pain and heartache. And so there's some folks who will often avoid going for certain submissions, or they'll avoid applying for certain research positions, whatever it is, because they think that they can't do it, or they think they're not smart enough, or they might be having a lot of trouble taking compliments from people around them. So often they end up self-sabotaging, so they're not found out to be a fraud. And so there's a lot of people that I've worked with in organizations who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, who still have feelings of imposter syndrome throughout their entire career. So if you're catching that early, right when you're out of university or right when you're in your 20s, you can save yourself not only a lot of heartache, but you can set yourself up for success that you deserve because you work really hard for it. So that's just a bit about what it is and why it's really important to catch early on.
Brilliant. Thank you. That definitely makes a lot of sense because I feel like the term imposter syndrome, unclarified, it's kind of scary all on its own.
Yeah.
But how can we recognize the typical thoughts and behaviors of imposter syndrome? And once we've done that, how can we manage it?
So it can look like a lot of different things. And what's really interesting is that it can look like overcompensating
Hmm.
or almost avoidance. So some of the typical stuff is, judging yourself really, really harshly, having very high levels of self-doubt, not going forward for awards or different projects or different jobs because, oh, there's no way I'm going to get it. Those feelings of intellectual fraudulence. And I know that sounds like quite a fancy way of putting it, but if someone says, "Oh, you're really smart," you seem to know not. Oh, no, no, no. That I don't know that much. That's really what that looks like. Working very hard to the point of over compensating, and they tend to look like perfectionists as well, and so they'll just keep working and working and working, feeling like they have to push and push and push those high levels of achievement. Very, very afraid of failure as well. Will often avoid displays of confidence because, again, all of these behaviors and thoughts are really around avoiding being found out. Whereas some other people might actually go really, really far in the other direction where they overcompensate, trying to display those feelings of confidence because they don't want it to be seen through their facade, as it were.
Hmm.
And most importantly, just attributing their success to temporary or external factors that have nothing to do with them. So, for example, like luck, or this right person plucked me out of my program, or just anything that has to do not with their own abilities and their own success. So in terms of managing it, there are a few basic things that you can do. So for those of you who are visual learners, this might sound a bit funny, but you want to keep track of what your accomplishments are. You want to actually write them down, because oftentimes we're so busy with life, or we get sucked into our work or whatever it is, that you really just want to keep track of what your achievements are, because it's not like a lot of other people are going to do that for you. Granted, you have these award ceremonies, but you have to keep track of what your own achievements are. You also want to be mindful of the I should do this or I ought to do this, because oftentimes you're placing those own barriers on yourself, or those own expectations on yourself. You also want to be a bit kind to yourself and recognize that you are human and you can make mistakes just like everybody else. And so you're not really immune to that. So just being a bit kinder, a bit more reasonable. And you want to do your best. You want to try to achieve, but you also want to focus on the positives of that. You want to say, I want to do my best because I want to do well, or I want to make an impact in the world. Not, I want to do my best so people don't find out I'm a fraud. There's a very different motivation around that. Also, I would encourage you all to educate yourself on imposter syndrome, because just like Colleen said, I hope I pronounced that right, Colleen.
Keelan.
Keelan, I was so close.
Don't worry, I think I have mispronounced a lot of names, so I will
It's okay.
these last few days.
I practiced it so many times, and I was like, oh. So it's also really just about educating yourself, because I think when you understand what the phenomenon is, and believe me, it is a phenomenon, when you understand it more, it becomes demystified. It becomes less scary. I mean, people like Michelle Obama have feelings of imposter syndrome. I'm not joking. Mike Myers, famous Canadian actor and director, Maya Angelou. I mean, the list goes on. You also want to get a lot of feedback, trusted feedback from people that are, kind of within your circle of trust, as it were. But you have to take on the positive feedback. So if they're going to give it to you, you have to make the practice of accepting it, especially if it's a positive thing. You want to set realistic, achievable goals for yourself, because if they're not realistic or achievable, you are setting yourself up to fail. And I know I just said this before, but please practice accepting compliments. I promise they will not kill you.
Brilliant. So since the onset of COVID-19, people are studying, researching, and working remotely. While
Mhm.
this flexibility might have seemed nice, the numbers of hours we are dedicating to work has seemed to increase, which
Yep.
then seems like a slope towards burnout. And then with that, having emotional intelligence skills like self-awareness and self-management are crucial now more than ever, especially say in the imposter syndrome scenario where someone who is overcompensating is working more hours than they even normally would at work now that they're at home to
Mm,
try not be like found out, as it were.
mhm.
How can we recognize signs of burnout before it becomes unmanageable?
So that's a really good question, because burnout, especially now, as you mentioned, is just off the charts.
Mhm.
So the way that I like to look at it is really from a biological and neurological perspective. So symptoms of burnout is basically your body and your mind screaming to you, please pay attention to me. I need a break. And so the body and mind are so amazing and adaptable and resilient, but to a point. So I often equate burning out with just going pop or pop. And the thing is that what that can look like is emotional symptoms and also physical and behavioral symptoms. So, from the emotional aspect, it can look like in the lead up irritability, fogginess, difficulty concentrating, low mood, anger, crying spells, withdrawing from pleasurable activities. And granted, we're all in a remote environment, so those are limited anyway. But that could mean like withdrawing from social interactions. You're just not feeling like yourself. You feel like you're off your baseline. Those are all warning signs of basically your body and mind saying, warning, warning, breakdown imminent, warning, warning. And so I would really encourage you to get to know what your baseline is. What does neutral look like? What does your normal, I'm very hesitant to use that word, what does your normal look like? and try to notice and pay attention to what those different symptoms might look like. So physically, really poor sleep, headaches, tummy troubles, non-hormonal acne, joint pain, feelings of tightness in the body, sexual dysfunction. There's lots of different ways, again, that your body and mind are speaking to you, particularly because of the mind-body connection. It's like a never-ending cycle that goes like this. So emotional distress can cause physical symptoms. Physical symptoms can cause emotional distress. And in terms of how that can come out behaviorally, one of the ways I like to joke about it is that whether it's in an organization or in school, when you're edging towards burnout, you tend to not play well with others. And so that can often come out where you might be snapping at other people, or you're feeling a bit less tolerant, things like that. So just take a look at those things, because they're not coming from nowhere. It's basically your body saying, if you don't release the pressure valve, I will release it for you.
Mhm.
So it's really just a matter of being mindful of that. And you don't get a medal for pushing through that. You really don't. Managing your emotional health is a healthy adult practice. And anybody who tells you it's not is not doing it for themselves.
Very, very fair. So now that we know the signs of burnout to look out for, what practical steps can we take care of ourselves in professional academic settings to avoid burnout? And on that, why is it crucial to normalize this process and talk about burnout with people around us?
So I'm going to start with that second question first, because it's just so important. So a massive, in fact, the entirety of what I do is normalizing discussions around mental health, stress, and also mental illness at work, because everybody has mental health. No matter who you are, no matter where you come from, if you're human, you have a brain, you have mental health. And it's now more than ever with the stressors that we have, because we all had a lot of really bad stressors before 2020, but now they're on steroids. And so not talking about mental health, not talking about burnout is not an option. It has to be normalized across all settings, whether it's academic, research, corporate, whatever it is, because it is something totally normal that cannot be stigmatized. And the thing is, you just never know who might appreciate that you just asked how they were doing,
Mm.
or that you can let somebody know that you're available in case they would like to talk to you. It doesn't mean you're becoming a counselor or therapist. You're just being a decent, supportive, empathetic human. And if you are allowing for those conversations to happen, you're releasing that pressure valve more often so you don't go pop. And the nice thing is that when people feel like they can have those conversations, they tend to feel more psychologically safe
Mhm.
in their environment. And higher levels of psychological safety lead to higher levels of productivity, higher levels of engagement, feelings of belongingness within a team. And so I'm very conscious that academic and research settings are very high pressure. I was once in a very high pressure academic setting when I was getting my master's degree and getting licensed as a therapist and all that sort of stuff. We had to normalize those discussions around mental health, because how are you supposed to do your best work if you can't talk about the building blocks that are getting you there?
Mhm.
Doesn't make any sense. So it's really important to just normalize those discussions. It doesn't make you the boogeyman, it just makes you human. And in terms of the simple things that you can do, there is the logistic side and then the health and well-being side. So in terms of the logistics, I'm very conscious that there never seem to be like enough hours in the day in terms of getting your tasks done, but you are not meant to be on constantly. You're not. So it's really about working smarter when you can and not necessarily harder. So you have to put reasonable boundaries and time boxing around what it is you're doing, because if you're sacrificing your mental health to work 18 hours a day on your projects or whatever it is, the cost is too high.
Mhm.
So it's really about, what can I reasonably accomplish in this day while still getting a reasonable amount of sleep? When do I need to start disconnecting from technology so I can feel like I'm not being bombarded with constant pieces of information? What can I do to help my body and my mind feel nourished and succeed? Does that mean going for a walk 20 minutes a day? Does that mean going for a run? Does that mean watching a comedy special? Whatever that looks like for you, you want to do things that promote a sense of well-being, and it doesn't have to be hours every day. It can be little chunks every day, because these small proper good moments lead to a cumulative positive impact that's measurable over time. And so you want to do things within the frame of reality. If you don't have 2 hours a day to do yoga, then don't do that, but just try to find the moments where you can to just pause and disconnect from the work, disconnect from technology, and just take care of yourself. Because how are you supposed to keep up the marathon if you keep breaking bones?
Very, very fair. So, I'd say my key takeaways definitely, I love setting myself goals, and tracking that. I always give myself a pat on the back when I do that. But I might turn to some of our attendees' questions, because
Sure.
our attendees are very interested in what you have to say.
Oh,
Um,
great.
so, Haley Proud asks, how do we go about initiating these difficult conversations with our peers to promote mental health well-being while having honest discussions about burnout and imposter syndrome?
Oh, that is such a good question. So I think that there is a bit of bravery required, because there is that vulnerability that comes up when you don't know how someone will react, and I get that, I do, but you just don't know if other people want to talk about it and they're afraid, or they don't know how. So it's really, as I mentioned before, honest discussions about burnout, just helping people to understand that managing burnout is a healthy adult practice and is a must-have non-negotiable. All of you are really smart. The evidence is all around you. You know how to build the case. The case is there. This is not fluffy nonsense. This is maintaining your sanity so you can work and also try to enjoy life a little bit. So basically, when you're trying to initiate those discussions, it's really just putting it out there and temperature checking. So basically saying, if you want to take the research route, you can do that. I've been reading a lot about imposter syndrome. I've been reading a lot about burnout, and I feel like there's some stuff in there that we in the team could relate to. And I really just feel like it would be useful for us to talk about, to create space to
Mhm.
talk about it. And so the more spoken about something is, the more normalized it becomes. And everybody, no matter who they are, where they come from, what their age is, needs a form of permission. And that might actually be you giving it to them. So it's really just breaking the ice. And you're not saying anything naughty. You're not asking someone, do you have a mental health condition? That's not what you're doing. You're just normalizing discussions that are wildly known about, but
Mhm.
just bringing them into your little bubble, and having some accountability about checking in on it more often.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I have another question from an attendee who says that many high achieving students have to cope with helicopter parents who have
Oh
very
yeah.
unrealistic ideals about what their children's abilities and success. How do
Oh,
you manage helicopter parenting as a young adult?
oh my God, what a good question. And I actually relate a lot to that question, personally and professionally, because I come from a very high achieving family, and it had its impact on me over the years. And also, I taught English in South Korea for 6 months, and the parents of those very young children were the absolute epitome of helicopter parents and putting so much pressure on their children to succeed. It's really about, in and this might sound funny, letting your parents know the emotional impact they're having on you, and that actually those that helicopter pressure is counterproductive,
Mhm.
and really just informing them of what the impact is, because often people don't pause to think about intention versus impact. Or maybe they're doing it to you because it was done to them, or they're doing it because they want you to have a good life. They want you to be successful. So it's really just around asking them to encourage you in a more productive way, in a way that will actually facilitate you feeling motivated, not feeling pressured.
Mhm.
So you're not telling them, don't tell me to succeed. You're telling them, here's the best way to help me succeed.
Yeah, the communication of what it actually takes to
Yes.
support you as opposed to what others think you need to be supported can always be a very interesting conversation.
Yeah.
I have another question. So, this is from an anonymous attendee asking, if we have mental health issues, is it okay to say during interviews, or does it make us look weak and not suitable for a job in a fast paced environment?
Oh gosh. So first of all, thank you for asking that question. It takes a lot of courage to raise something like that. So what I would say is if you have a mental health condition, first of all, you are not alone. 1.9 billion people in the entire world have a diagnosed mental health condition. So what I would say is it's probably not necessary within the interview stage because typically that information is shared with people that you trust.
Mhm.
So if you want them to know, like, let's say, for example, you have generalized anxiety disorder, which is so common. It's really, let's say you get the job and you want to inform your boss that you struggle with anxiety, but here's the best way to help you succeed. Or here's the best way to communicate with you so that there are no misunderstandings. First of all, having a mental health condition does not make you weak. It doesn't mean that you are unable to do a job. Not at all. It just means you have different needs and different strengths. So I would say, I don't think it's necessary really to share in an interview because oftentimes, a mental health condition that is equated to a physical chronic condition. So in an interview, you wouldn't share with someone that necessarily that you have Crohn's disease. You
Mhm.
wouldn't share with someone that you have type 2 diabetes. So I would say think about why you want to share it, and then you want to say what do I want my boss to do with this information? Do I want them to communicate with me differently? Do I need to have my project structured a different way? So I would say you want to build that trust and then think about why you're sharing it with them and what you want them to do with that information.
Brilliant. Thank you, Melissa. I
Sure.
have another question for you. Are
Yeah,
there
keep them coming.
are there any particular dispositional factors that would predict imposter syndrome in someone?
So that's a very good question. So what's really interesting is that the research has shown that it um, really just is there is no distinct cause. They're saying that sometimes people who are more anxious or might have low self-esteem or might struggle with neuroticism technically might be predisposed to that, but there's no one specific cause. So there's lots of also environmental factors like family dynamics. So those helicopter parents you're mentioning, they are definitely an influence of imposter syndrome. So you have family dynamics, you can have cultural expectations. Something very important to note is that having a mental health condition or a mood disorder is not correlated
Mhm.
with imposter syndrome. However, if you struggle with feelings of anxiety or depression or something like that, it can make it easier to struggle with imposter syndrome, if that makes sense. Um, and also social media influences, things that you read, things you see on the internet when you compare yourself to others. There's lots of environmental factors, family factors. It's just those different rings of influence, if that makes sense.
Brilliant. Thank you. So I have one last question for you from an attendee. They ask, how do you manage your everyday stress?
Oh, good question. So, what's really interesting now is with the pandemic, I've had to change the way that I manage my stress.
Mhm.
So, I have my own, what I call, and I lecture on this all the time, called mental well being non negotiables. So, what that is very easily achievable goals that I set for myself that I meet every week at a cadence that I decide, barring death, dismemberment, hell, or high water. So I'm serious. So it
Mhm.
has to be really achievable. So if that means 5 minutes a day, 1 hour twice a week, I set the tone. So the way that I manage my stress is I time box how often I watch the news.
Mhm.
I time box my access to technology before bed. I go for a walk every day. I set aside time to play with our new rescue dog. I make sure that I do cooking and a bit of shimmying in the kitchen with my husband. I make sure that we watch a comedy special like once a week. I make sure that we go for a hike in an outdoor space so we can safely be socially distanced from other people. And also I use something called the circles of control and influence from Stephen Covey. I cannot recommend this model enough. So the nice thing about it is that it's an instant filtration system on helping you to let go of things you cannot control or influence. So imagine you have the smallest circle here. This is what you can control, small for a reason. The next one out is what you can influence, which is a little bit larger. And the next one out, I like to call you have no shot, although that's not what the model calls it.
Mm-hmm.
So if something is worrying you and is stressing you out, the first question I ask myself is, can I control this? Can I influence this? If the answer is no, way easier said than done. I have to work on letting it go. I am most definitely a worrier. Absolutely. And I'm incredibly hard on myself. So I wouldn't recommend this model to you guys if I didn't use it personally. So what I would recommend is printing out that model and posting it up at your desk or at home, wherever you are currently working with the 3 circle model, and look at it every day. And if you're having a concern or a stressor, say, which circle does it fit in? Do I need to let it go? And no matter what your mental well-being non-negotiables are, I highly recommend that you start on the smaller side. So the paradox of choice would say that if you pick more than 3 to 5 things at once, you are less likely to do them. So start small. What are a couple of things I can do every week at a cadence that I decide that make me feel good and I will commit to doing no matter what? And so those are some of the things that I do, and I switch them out each week depending on how I'm feeling. So for example, some weeks I may not want to shimmy in the kitchen and I'll just go walking every day. But make sure you do at least a couple of things and commit and stick to them, because your mental well-being depends on it.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Melissa. I might ask you when we wrap up just to type the name of the author of the model that you were discussing into the
Yeah,
chat for everyone, please. So I would
sure.
really appreciate that. And thank you very much for speaking with me today. A lot of what you said really resonated with me, so I really appreciate it. But we're not going to take too much more of your time. We will let you get back to your rescue puppy. Um,
Aw.
so thank you very much, Melissa, for speaking with us here today. We've really appreciated it.
It's my pleasure. And if any of you would like to connect with me, I'm findable on LinkedIn. My website is melissadoman.com. And for any of you that work in organizations, research institutions, universities that want help with discussing mental health at work, stress at work, please don't hesitate to get in contact with me. And I'm very happy to see how I can best help your organization.